The Bird Emergency. I'm Grant Williams, and this is the podcast where we talk about birds, rare birds, threatened birds, difficult birds, elusive birds, just birds. And today I'm really thrilled to meet Dan Nugent and introduce him to you. Dan's a PhD candidate working out of La Trobe University and doing an ecological and management project with the Plains Wanderer. How are you, Dan? Thanks for coming in.
I'm good, thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Dan, why the Plains Wanderer?
That's a good question. So before going back to uni, I'd been doing a bit of grassland restoration work, and I'd always had a kind of interest in birds as well. Then I learnt that there was a bird that was only found within grasslands, and it combined two of my interests. And then, just started learning about it and how unique it is, and got hooked.
Now, for our listeners who are in Scandinavia or sitting in the cafes of Paris, what's so unique and interesting about the Plains Wanderer?
So it's actually really unique. So it's a small ground-dwelling bird that lives in native grasslands. It looks like a quail in many respects, but it's actually not related to quails at all. It's actually more closely related to inland shorebirds. And it actually sits with within its own family of birds, the Podomidae. So it's the only member of its family, which makes it really genetically unique. So really, there's nothing else like it in Australia. Its closest living relative is actually found in South America. So genetically, it's one of the most unique birds in the world. And the fact that it's also critically endangered makes it a really special species.
Now, what's your best guess at what the current population would be of the Plains Wanderer?
It's really hard to get a grasp of what it is at the moment. So it's only got two population strongholds left. One of them is in northern Victoria, the other one's in western New South Wales. And it fluctuates depending on climate, and it's been really knocked about the last few years. We've been, both of its population hotspots have been hit by drought. So it's probably below 1,000, we think. But because it's so small and elusive, it's really hard to find, which makes it hard to get a really good count of it. We think, probably around 1,000-ish is probably the best estimate we have.
And it's basically mostly a nocturnal bird. That's right, isn't it?
That's what most people think, but it's actually diurnal. The fact that most people think it's nocturnal that's when it's easiest to find. So during the day, it's so elusive. You can wander around grasslands for years and never see one. And I've only ever seen one during the day, and I've been studying for the last 5 years. But at night time, you walk out into a grassland with a torch, and it would just freeze in your torchlight, and you can get up nice and close to it. And a lot of people have photographs of them at night. That's not because when they're active, that's just the easiest time to find them. They're just sleeping and dozy, and they don't run away, so you can get a nice photograph. So it's actually diurnal, probably a little bit crepuscular, most active during the morning and night time, but just sleeping at night.
Gee, well, I think that would be why I assumed it was nocturnal, because I think every photograph I've ever seen, certainly any that come to mind, have been generally it's on a track, standing upright, generally a male, I think. It's just about every photograph I've checked out too. Now, the males do the rearing of the young. Is that right, or is that another misconception that I've got from old popular literature?
No, that's spot on. So it's a bit of a role reversal with the Plains Wanderer. It's the males are smaller and duller than the females, and it's kind of the female who defends the territory. And then, the male does most of the egg incubation and raises the chicks, which is quite interesting. And it's actually the female who vocalizes, makes a big, deep, ooming sound that calls out to try and attract males. But it's interesting in that, the roles have reversed for this bird.
Now, there's often polyamorous or polygamous behaviours with birds with that sort of role reversal. Do the females just one clutch? Do they do the incubating? Do we know all of that?
We don't know it in a great deal of detail, but we do suspect that a female will have multiple males within her patch. So she'll lay multiple clutches of eggs for different males. So that's something that's familiar with this species as well. But there's still a lot of mystery around with how much. There's been a bit of researching with the captive birds now that the females do play some part in the incubation process, but we think it's probably mainly the males, mainly in the wild.
Well, let's talk about the captive population and the management in a little while. Let's just talk about the bird in the wild. It's basically a ground dwelling bird, but it's not flightless. So do we know how much territory it covers? Does it, or do they pair up? Is it a home range situation? Do they defend territories, or are they, as the name suggests, are they nomadic?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit one of the mysteries for this bird. They certainly are capable of flight and long distance flight. There's been a bit of genetic analysis done recently on a few of the populations, and there doesn't seem to be much differentiation between Victorian and New South Wales birds. So birds are moving between, which is, a few hundred kilometres apart. So these birds can definitely fly, and they're willing to fly. How often they're doing those kind of movements, we're not sure. So part of my research has been putting tiny GPS trackers on these birds, and some of that's given us some insight into how much they move. So typically they will set up a territory and they won't fly. And we know that one of their best kind of strategies for avoiding predators is not to take flight like a quail might. These guys will just drop down low and either run really fast and duck into some grass, or they'll just freeze. They're really reluctant to fly when approached by predators, and they'll do the same thing when they're approached by people as well.
Living in grasslands, and is it exclusively grassland, or do they live in lightly wooded country as well?
No, it's one of the only Australian birds that's an exclusive grassland specialist. It won't go into pasture or crops. It needs native grassland, and it will go out of its way to avoid trees. We think that they really don't like trees because they're quite vulnerable to falcons and things that like to perch up on trees. So you never really find a plains runner anywhere within a few hundred meters of a tree. So they definitely need open plains country.
Now, if they're avoiding pasture, does that put them in a habitat where there's going to be a lot of domestic grazing animals? Like, do they share their country with sheep and cattle? Is it sort of rangeland? I'm thinking more of the New South Wales population. Is that a rangeland like habitat that they're in?
Yeah, well, there's pretty much no grassland left that hasn't had, at some point in the last 200 years, been grazed by livestock. So these birds do coexist with livestock grazing for sure. If they didn't, they'd be gone by now. So in both the New South Wales and the Victorian population, you will find birds on grazing properties. So they're compatible, and that's where you usually find them.
Who owns the land now that these remnant populations are hanging on in? Is it public managed lands, or is it on a combination of public land and private land?
It's a combination of both. Yeah, both. There's not a great deal of grassland in the public land estate in reserve systems. A lot of plains wanderer habitats on private land, so without sustainable management by graziers and things, a bird would lose its habitat. So thankfully there are a range of landholders who are actively managing their paddocks to support the habitat that they need, because these birds, and we've seen this the last few years in drought, is if you overgraze your paddocks, you'll lose the birds. They need the cover. They need those tussocks to hide and forage in between. And when they disappear, you find that the bird disappears as well.
So the focus of your PhD work, Dan, what is it? Let's go through what the aims are and what you're finding out.
So I guess there's two components. One of them was trying to just understand a bit more about the behaviour and ecology of the bird. So to do that, I've been using, like I mentioned before, miniature GPS trackers, attaching those to birds and just trying to understand where they're going within the grasslands, what kind of habitats are they choosing to use, what kind of habitats are they choosing to avoid, and what's the influence of things like food availability and vegetation structure in those kind of habitat choices. So there's the movement side of my project and habitat requirement side. And then the other side is looking at how management impacts a habitat. So I've been working with some land managers, Parks Victoria in Victoria here, and we've been doing some grazing and ecological burn trials to see how habitat responds to those different kind of treatments, and to see which kind of management option might be best suited for the plains wanderer. So they're the main two research components that I've been doing.
Have you got any indications on what strategies are going to be the most effective?
So I think they've all probably got a place. So within the reserve system, there's, I guess, a kind of conservation grazing where they only graze at specific times of year, which is mainly to maintain a kind of open vegetation structure for the birds. And maintaining that open vegetation structure is really important. So that's the status quo at the moment, which is just a bit of light grazing. But I was also looking at something called crash grazing, where you bring in a big flock of say, sheep, and they munch all the grass and plant material down, and then remove them again and give the grassland a long time to rest and to flower and to recover. So they're two different grazing techniques that I looked at. And what we saw, particularly the crash grazing, and these are earlier results, but it looks like it could be effective for controlling weeds within these grasslands, which are impacting the plains wanderer because they're impacting the vegetation structure within the grasslands. And that vegetation structures are really important to the bird. So, yeah, we're getting some insight into that. Some other things I've been looking at with that as well is food. So plains wanderers eat seeds and invertebrates. And, yeah, so I'm still looking into the results for those things. But at this stage, we really know nothing about what kind of impacts grazing has on the food resources for this bird. So it's been a big knowledge gap for a long time. So just trying to start to learn something about that.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the invasive weeds, because that was sort of front of mind for me as a competitive pressure, really. But what about the land-based feral predators, so foxes, cats, even rats, rodent on nestlings and on eggs? Do we actually know much about what's impacting the population?
Yeah, the predation one's interesting. There's probably a lack of evidence at the moment about what level of impact, particularly foxes and cats. We know they exist within the landscape. So they're out there, but there's been limited examples of them physically predating upon birds. So we're not too sure. We suspect that they probably are taking individuals. But yeah, it's actually quite a big knowledge gap. Because there is no cover, I guess there's no real shrubs or places for cats to hide in. We typically don't see cats out there very often. Foxes you do. And so they're probably having an impact. Rats you don't see out in the grasslands. We have native marsupials, fat-tailed dun ants, which are quite common, and they seem to be doing quite well. And they also keep the mice population down too. So those things aren't a factor. But yeah, definitely need to delve into the impact of foxes a bit further for this species.
Because the populations are in very limited areas and a really specific habitat type, how are you finding the private landholders? How are their attitudes to the plains wanderer, and are they involved in efforts to help them hang on?
So I mainly work my research is focused in Victoria, so I only know about the Victorian landholders, but there's definitely a cohort of graziers up on Victoria's northern plains who are going out of their way to try and manage their grasslands for the bird. And they're very proud to have the bird in their paddock. And a number of them have put conservation covenants onto their grasslands, which are really good because they mean that grassland is protected from cultivation forever. And it's cultivation which is the big threat for these birds, particularly in Victoria, because this is a big cereal and dairy and beef kind of region. So we really can't afford to lose any more grassland up there. So thankfully there are a number of graziers who have a lot of grassland who are going out of the way to protect the bird. And thankfully a lot of their kind of paddocks are adjacent to the national park grasslands as well. So we've got a bit of connectivity and a bit of connected habitat for the birds, which is really important. We really can't afford to lose any more. Because I think there's, at last estimates, there's something like less than 1% of the pre-European extent of grassland in that region left. So yeah, we're down to the very last bits.
For a landholder that does put a covenant over their property, who administers that? What's the system?
So it's a voluntary system. It's being run by Trust for Nature, who are a non-government organisation. So yeah, the Trust for Nature will come to you saying something like, you have got really important ecological values on your property, or sometimes landholders go to them saying, what's a conservation covenant? What can I get out of it? So yeah, Trust for Nature are administering it at the moment. And so I think at the moment there's a financial incentive. I can't remember the number of what you get, but you do get paid to put a covenant on at the moment because it's really important for grassland conservation of the bird as well.
So the actual covenant, is that binding for say future owners, or is or how it works? Is it that there's the incentive for them to preserve the land? So a future landholder, if a farmer sold, if someone had to sell, or as a result of an estate auction or something like that, the land was transferred by whatever means to another person, they've got an incentive not to develop it. Or does the covenant actually bind them to no development whatsoever?
Yeah, my understanding is it's binding onto the title of the land, even if it changes hands. So conservation covenants, they do restrict some practices, but they still let you, in this instance, they still allow you to run stock on the grassland. So you can still run it as a farm. It just means you can't cultivate.
It's the cultivation, the soil disturbance, and I guess the overgrazing would probably be limited, would it? So there's probably
part of the agreement with the covenant is that typically
there's a stocking level
for a lot of landholders up there. It's almost status quo management because they know how to graze their land sustainably. But there is certainly a restriction around, particularly during dry times, to go a bit easier on the grassland and make sure there's good grass cover even after an extended drought or something.
Sounds like a positive thing all round. Apart from the land with covenants attached, Dan, are there any predator-free holdings, fenced-off areas that the Plains Wanderer is existing in?
No, there's not. My understanding is that there are plans to build something like that in New South Wales, but it's not developed yet, I don't think. But in Victoria, there's no predator-free areas. If you drive up into the region, you'd just be driving past what you think is a paddock, but it's probably part of the national park. So there's nothing really distinguishing about it. Yeah, like I said before, even the national park, they use sheep and cattle to maintain the structure. So there's nothing too distinguishing about it.
You mentioned earlier that there's a captive population. What can you tell us about that? I know that's being run by the zoos, I think. That's right, Taronga and Melbourne Zoo?
Yeah, so it's a collaborative project between a number of zoos across Australia. So I believe it's Taronga and Dubbo and Zoos Victoria. There's birds out of Werribee Zoo that are being bred, and also Monarto in South Australia, okay. Yep. I believe, have birds or are getting birds. So it's a big joint collaborative project, which is probably suitable for the bird because it's not just found in Victoria. There are birds seen in New South Wales, there are birds seen in Victoria, and there's also regular sightings of the bird in South Australia as well. Up around, there's a bush heritage property called Bulkamata where the birds have been seen pretty regularly over the last 10 years. So the bird has a really big range, and so the zoo establishments are working across that range as well.
Is there any sort of crossover between the work you're doing and the work they're doing? Are you sharing information?
So I work closely with the zoo team. A lot of the information I'm getting through my tracking is going to be used to inform future release of the birds, letting us know how much space these birds need, how they can interact together. So there's lots of different pieces that we're all feeding in between each other.
How do you do the trapping and attaching the trackers, Dan?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, the best way to find these birds is at nighttime. So what we typically do is we get in a vehicle and we have big spotlights and things on, and we just slowly drive through a paddock, and eventually you will come across a bird. And what the birds typically do in a spotlight is they just freeze, and you can literally go up with a fishing net and just place it over the top of the bird and pick it up. It's pretty remarkable how they... Yeah, it's just a really strange thing that they don't seem to notice you at night time. So it's just a case of putting a fishing net over the top of them. And then, so the kind of tracker I was using was like a backpack setup. So bands that go underneath the wings of the bird and it sits on the back. And my tracker that I was using would be, I'd track the birds for about 7 to 10 days. So I had really small trackers. So the battery life of them was really small. So that means that they're they're talking to satellites over a week or so, and then I'd go back out and find the bird again using a VHF antenna, and then recapture the bird, and then get my device back, and then I have a device full of really interesting information.
Just having a giggle. I spoke to Chris McCall recently about his work with red goshawks, and they can go years without finding one, and then it's a real bugger to catch one to fit their harness. And they get data for about 2 years. But he'll probably want to strangle you about how easy it is for you to. You still got the difficulty of actually finding the bird before you put the transmitter on, but you don't have to worry about a loose stitch or anything so that the bird can lose the harness. You just go and find them again. Put the fish net over again.
It doesn't always go that well. I've lost a few birds on a few instances. I've gone back into the paddock and the bird's gone. So we think that it's dispersed somewhere, and because the antennas have a limited range, the VHF transmitters have a limited range. I've lost a few pieces of very expensive equipment. So although they're easy to catch when you find them, finding them again can be really hard.
Oh, yeah,
so it's not always easy.
Well, one of my particular interests with any of those sort of projects, Dan, sorry for that, Dan. Still thinking about those goshawks. Is how can the regular Joe, the non-academic, support your work? Is there a citizen science sort of aspect to your project?
Not so much to my project. There's a volunteer group who does regular monitoring of the plains-squirrel population on Victoria's Northern Plains. They're called Friends of Terrick National Park. They're a group of locals who go out, and a few times a year they'll go out and survey for the birds.
Regular counts.
They do regular counts and keep an eye on how the population's tracking. So they're really important part of the conservation of the species. But yeah, with my project at the moment, I've done with all the kind of fun fieldwork things for a while. So yeah, not spending too much more time in the field with that.
A lot of times when people hear that I'm talking to a researcher, a field researcher, they think you're spending all your time out there in the glorious sun and with your hat with the corks bobbing off the rim. But how much time do you have to spend in front of a computer crunching numbers, typing reports, statistical analysis, compared to the time that you get out there and you can pretend that you're Steve Irwin?
Yeah, unfortunately, the fun stuff, is probably a smaller part of what I do than what I'd like. Yeah, maybe a quarter or something. I probably do more fieldwork than I should anyway. But yeah, a lot of time in front of computers. And another thing with my project was because I was interested in food for the birds, that means I've been out there collecting invertebrates and seeds, and that means I have to take those things back to the lab. And I spend a lot of time sitting in front of a microscope just counting seed by seed or insect by insect, spending a lot of time looking at screens full of numbers because, that's all we're out there to get is numbers. And we have to come back to our computers and try and make sense of them all. So, like you said, it's not all exciting.
And research, even though it's your project, you're the PhD candidate on this project, it sounds like you have to do some collaborative work with some entomologists, not etymologists, some entomologists and maybe some botanists. Do you have a big team working on this?
So I'm collaborating with a few different people at the moment. Yeah, like you said, I'm getting help from an entomologist with my invertebrate samples. I've got someone helping me with some remote sensing things, looking at habitat on quite large scales, using satellite imagery. I'm also trying to understand what the birds have been eating. So I've also got a geneticist doing some kind of helping me do some scat analysis. The plant stuff I'm all right with myself. But yeah, my team's always growing, and another component which is coming on soon is a kind of a side project is we're also starting to look at different kind of tools for finding the birds out in the grassland. So we're starting to look at potential of using thermal imaging. So both vehicle-based thermal imaging cameras and drones and things as well. So that's some people coming along to help me with that as well. So lots of different things going on.
Be really interesting. I don't know whether you can say, but is that the wildlife drones team?
It's not, but this is just something that's just starting up at the moment. So we're just putting it all together, as well as the thermal stuff. We're also looking into, not part of my PhD, but a part of more so the future release plans is looking into new technologies for tracking and things. So yeah, we're keen to start collaborating with other people on that stuff as well.
Oh, that's pretty exciting, especially the idea that the breeding program will allow some future releases and perhaps for the population to go into new areas and breed in new areas, maybe in South Australia. And well, there's got to be suitable habitat still outside of the regular range, we would hope.
Yeah, in Victoria, because there's been so much habitat loss, it's going to be tricky to find empty places. I think there are a few, particularly there's an area up near Grazing, which is just south of the Murray River, where there used to be lots of birds. There's a few there now, but the population used to be much bigger there, so there's potential there. And also, particularly New South Wales, although a lot of the habitat's been lost through overgrazing in kind of the drought we've just been through, but a lot of that habitat with a bit of rain is going to be suitable again. So it could be a perfect place to start thinking about trying to re-establish populations and things like that.
You mentioned large-scale habitat management. Is that the sort of later stages of your work?
You mean in terms of grazing?
Sort of drawing up, collaborating with the authorities, I guess, and the landowners on the large-scale and longer-term management issues.
Yeah, no, that's something I'd definitely like to take my research. Yeah, we've got so little native grassland left. We really need to be managing every last bit we have really well. So we've got to find new ways to do that. Conservation covenants are part of that picture, but I think we need to be looking into other kind of incentive programs. And there are some things underway in New South Wales now that the government is running, but we see it time and time again where paddocks are being overgrazed and we lose these really important places for the birds. So yeah, we really need to come up with kind of better partnerships between private landholders and people working with plains wanderers. So yeah, it's a space that I think we need to be paying more attention to, particularly if we're looking to expand populations and things like that.
Now, very much in the news lately, Dan, has been the adequacy or otherwise of the conservation laws that are in place in Victoria, in Australia, and each state has their own set as well. Now, the plains wanderer is critically endangered. So is there a recovery plan in place?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there was a recovery plan produced in, I think it was 2016.
Is it effective? Are there problems between the two jurisdictions with the two main populations of the bird?
It's hard to say whether it's what kind of impact it's having for the conservation of the species. One of the worrying things is we are still losing native grasslands, particularly in Victoria, from cultivation. So in respect of slowing habitat loss, it's not working, which is really worrying. Like I mentioned before, we can't afford to be losing more grassland than we are. And I guess one of the really tricky things with the current environmental laws is that, so say you have a grassland and it was ploughed up 30 years ago, grasslands are incredibly resilient and the grassland will start to come back and almost be into a state which is suitable for plains wanderers again in 30 years' time. But under our current environmental laws, the farmer's allowed to come and plough up that paddock again because it was ploughed 30 years ago, even though it might be good plains wanderer habitat now. The farmer's perfectly within his rights to do that. So it's just really strange one because we've got this perfect system that can recover really quickly. And so we could be making really big gains in terms of expanding the amount of grassland that's there. But yeah, within current environmental laws, there's no real incentive for us to be allowing the grassland to come back and creating more habitat for the bird, which is quite sad.
Well, there's no creative thought, is there? Like there's no thought that the habitat's got a value on its own and that the plains wanderer population has an intrinsic value. I guess is it mainly sort of barley and wheat that is being cropped, or is it mainly just improving pasture for grazing animals?
It's a combination of all those things, and there's a wide variety of crops that are put in depending on season, particularly in this region. And I guess the sad thing is that you can still have a working, productive, and profitable farm if you have a native grassland. You can still graze it and produce livestock.
I guess where I'm going with it is that we haven't come up with a plan where we can value untouched or suitably maintained grassland and put a value per hectare on it and subsidise the farmer so that he doesn't ruin that habitat. We subsidise production or lack of production in so many different ways, but when it comes to a natural population, we haven't been able to wrap our brains around that yet.
Yeah, it's quite frustrating, and I guess conservation covenants do that to an extent. They are placing a value on that land, and you are rewarded financially for securing it for conservation, but because it is just a voluntary program, you don't have to do it, so you don't have to place that value on it. And I guess, yes, like in a farming operation, some people don't like to be tied up with covenants as well. So you do lose a bit of flexibility. So just trying to find that way where we can put a value on it, and everyone can get a win from it. It's a tricky space.
Yeah, I think it's just we've got to win the battle that there's actually a public good and there's a value for the public in having these things remain. Once, and we haven't got there yet. We value old churches. We value 100-year-old church at a crossroad, but we don't value, remnant vegetation. We don't. We'll get there. If the number of covenants is growing, that tells me that the agricultural community is slowly being converted. But perhaps what we need, I don't know, I just think we need to think a bit outside the box that, there's subsidies available for all sorts of things. So, I'm not against subsidising a landowner to maintain habitat, And, So there's been talk about those kinds of things, and also having a certification program as well. I think if you're grazing your land sustainably for the species, then maybe you should be able to put a certification on your product, and you get paid a high price for that product because it is sustainable. So thinking along those kinds of lines for the plains wanderer might be work, because it is an animal that is compatible with agriculture and food production. So we should be taking advantage of that. And and it's iconic, as you said. Not only is it Australia's only representative of the tribe, it's the world's only one. It's genetically important, but we haven't got to that stage yet. My concern for that sort of thinking, though, Dan, is that as soon as people realise that the koala is threatened, there'll be all these subsidies going to developers and whatnot to not develop, to preserve the koala, and all the money will go into a species like the koala, and that the unknown species, like the western ground parrot and like the plains wanderers, will just be forgotten because, maybe 1,000 people. If you say plains wanderer, maybe 1,000 people ears prick up. But you say koala and it's earthquakes around the world. So but really got off track with that a bit, Dan. But
it's a really good point, and I think part of the trouble with the plains wanderer is you can't go out and see it reliably. Even if you know where to go, it is impossible to see during the day, which makes it a hard thing to love if you don't get to see it. And the other thing is grasslands in themselves, they're often a forgotten kind of environment as well. They're not big and beautiful and pretty. You have to get down on your hands and knees to appreciate the diversity of a grassland. So it's those are a couple of things that are up against birds like the plains wanderer, I think.
Yeah. But yet, God's shining his light on you, Dan. He's giving you a hard time there.
I know. The sun keeps moving on me. I'm trying to.
I know. I've been watching your very artful efforts to keep it out of your eyes, Dan. And another challenge that comes up with with projects like you're undertaking a PhD is money. How is your project being funded?
So luckily, I've been successful in a few grant applications, which has been fantastic. I think working on the plains wanderer, which is one of the most conservation important species in the world, has helped. So I've been lucky enough to be supported from the Victorian government. Zoos Victoria have given me money. Also Holsworth, which is a wildlife research grant provider. And I've also received some money from international conservation bodies as well to do my research. So without that, this project wouldn't have gotten off the ground. So I've been very fortunate to receive that. Like I said before, the trackers I'm using are very expensive. So yeah, thankfully I've been able to do the research that I have with their help.
Oh, that's great. So has it only been funding that you've applied for and that you've been successful getting, or has there been any corporates or any other benefactors that have said, hey, Plains Wanderer, here, great, here's $20,000?
Yeah, I've had to plead for the money. So yeah, but like I said, my project's been a bit lucky than others. Like you mentioned, doing research can be expensive, particularly if you're doing field research and you have to come up with ways to fund yourself. So yeah, it's hard, but luckily I think a lot of the work that particularly the zoos are doing is certainly lifting the profile of the plains wanderer. I think the number of people who know what is growing slowly, so that's been good, and there are some people who care about it.
Yeah, certainly Zoos Victoria have been pretty regular in putting updates up about the plains wanderer, and I've noticed regular bulletins about the sort of genetic work that's going on with Taronga. So hopefully I can get someone to tell me about that. I don't expect you're going to be telling me about the genetic work that's going on yet, Dan.
No, not my area of expertise.
Now, Dan, is there anything else that you think people need to be aware of about the plains wanderer? I don't know if we've really conveyed what a weird bird it is compared to pretty much everything else that's out there in that sort of grassland environment. It's just a weird guy, isn't it?
It is really weird, and like you said, the kind of role reversals between the sexes is quite unique. The female is able to make this very loud, deep call, which can travel hundreds of meters out into the grasslands. So such a big call from such a small bird is quite strange. So, and I guess there's just a lot of mystery that surrounds the bird still, because no one has observed it behaving naturally during the day before. Like, it's just something that hasn't been done. They're so elusive that you can't do it. So there are a lot of things we just don't know what they're doing. Starting to be some kind of, I guess, some hypotheses around them doing kind of partnering displays between each other. So some of the footage coming out of the captive breeding program showed that these birds will do performances for each other to attract mates. So it's pretty amazing. Like, we had no idea they'd do that. The female is quite colourful, and she's got a kind of a rufusy breast and a black and white spotty necklace and these kind of strange yellow eye and yellow beak and yellow feet. So it like you said, it's a weird bird, and there's nothing really like it out there. So there's lots of interesting things about it.
So they make a call like a bustard. They behave like an emu when it comes to their breeding. They put on a performance like a bird of paradise. They look like a quail, but they won't be flushed, and you can walk up to them with a fishing net and plonk it on top of them. They're cool.
Fascinating little bird, and I guess it's millions of years that it's evolved to be so unique. I guess that's why it's just a weird bird that's really unlike anything else.
Now, Dan, I think we've talked a lot about the plains wanderer, but now I want to know about Dan. You mentioned before I pushed the button that you're not sure where you are on the bird nerd spectrum. So we're going to find out a bit. When did you first realise that you were into birds? Were you one of those kids like me who was lying on the lounge room floor with a little sketch pad and badly drawing your favourite birds at the age of 5?
Yeah, that pretty accurately describes me. I guess it wasn't, when I was a kid, it wasn't just birds. Like, I'd carry around field guides for everything, plants and mammals and birds. So I hadn't really chosen them as a kid, and I don't think it was really until probably university that I did a few field courses that I got into probably proper bird watching and getting quite good at identifying birds. So I was probably, a bit of a late bloomer to being a full bird nerd, but I got there eventually.
Mate, I suspect that we're going to have a scary amount of things in common. If I mention a field guide and I say the name Cronin, do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, well, because we're not talking birds at the moment, right? So the what is it? The vegetation of Southeast Australia. You know the one?
Australia, yeah.
Okay, and then if I say costumans, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we're talking plants again.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying. Yeah. Well, we've got Cronin and we've got costumans. So I had them as a kid and as a student. Costumans was my like Bible for years. And then when I went to Queensland, I found that there was a similar sort of series, except you needed. I think I had 5 volumes. So it was
hard to carry around in your backpack.
Yeah, not as difficult as Flora of New South Wales, but Costumans had everything. You know, throw it in your backpack and away you go.
Yeah.
But we get. I digress. We've worked out that we're both total nerds. What's your field guide of choice when it comes to birds, Dan?
I guess I've gone pretty electronic in the last few years. I have the Michael Morecambe app on my phone.
Yeah.
That's my go-to bird one at the moment. But yeah, I'm trying to think of what I have. I have lots of hard copies of all of them. But yeah, I've gone electronic in recent years.
So we're going with the Morecambe app. You're the second one recently who's said that they've sort of foregone their hard copy field guide. So you're not a Simpson and Day or a Slater guy.
I've definitely got copies of those field guides, but it's been a while since I've gotten out a hard copy of a field guide.
It seems to be that the seabird and the wader people need the hard copies to get out and to really analyse the undertail plumage and the size of the beaks and whatnot. Favorite piece of equipment when you're out in the field, Dan?
Favorite piece of equipment? Bird related? Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm hoping you'll lean with bird related, but there's some things that people just can't go out in the field without. Do you need to have a notebook and scribble notes? Is it binoculars? Is it a camera? Is it a GPS locator? What is it that you have to have when you go out for a recreational day in the bush?
I'd say it's just binoculars is, obviously the one that I always carry. I write notes on my phone these days. So actually, no, I do always have a notebook as well. That's all. I have a notebook and I have a pair of binoculars. I'm not very good at photography. So I don't carry a camera too often with me. Yeah, just like to observe and take it all in.
Well, you really need an offsider if you've got a decent pair of binoculars and you've got a tripod and a camera with a maybe 400 or 600 lens. You need an offsider to carry some of it.
Yeah, some of the pieces of equipment. That's why when I'm looking for volunteers, I usually end up with someone who's a photographer in the group. So I always get good pictures, but they're usually just not mine.
That's pretty good. Pretty smart thinking, Dan. Now, what's your favourite bird?
Well, I guess I won't say plains wanderer because that's too obvious.
If it really is, but
I'd say either a plains wanderer because I've learned to love the uniqueness of it. But so I did my honours project on the superb lyrebird in the foothill forests around Melbourne, and I think they're a pretty amazing bird as well. So they'd probably be up there too.
I'm going to be talking about the superb lyrebird in an upcoming episode because it looks like they're knocking on the door of going from common to becoming endangered just from the fire season.
Yeah, no, they've had a huge amount of their range burnt in the fires. So some of my honours research looked at the impacts of the Black Saturday bushfires on lyrebirds in that kind of fire impact zone, and they do have some abilities to persist after fire. They're quite good at finding wet gullies and places to shelter in. That's what I found. But obviously the scale and the intensity of the summer bushfires means that a lot of gullies were burnt. So it's a sad story coming out of a lot of those fire grounds. So hopefully that if enough lyrebirds are persisting to reboost the population.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Mm.
So that's a good pair. You got the Plains Wanderer because you know it so well, and it's such a crazy duck, and the superb lyrebird. I reckon that's a good choice. Favorite place to go birding?
I don't get out there as much as I'd like to, but it's not just for birding, but East Gippsland, I think, is a really amazing place, both for plants and animals and birds. So that would be one of them. But also, yeah, my home patch, which is in the Yarra Valley, just out of Melbourne, is also a really nice place. Some of the kind of wetter forest gullies and things are a really nice place to go look for things, not just lyrebirds, but all the kind of other kind of wet gully loving birds.
Your robins, your olive whistler, your pilot bird.
Yeah, yes, lots of those birds that make really nice calls, and it's just a really nice place to spend a bit of time.
And the whipbird, of course.
Yeah, whipbirds are great.
On your bucket list, Dan, your big wish for your bird watching list, and where do you really want to go? Where's somewhere anywhere in the world that you would really love to go and sit there with your binoculars?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure. I have an international bird that I really want to see. I guess I like big raptors and things, so maybe something like a Philippines eagle, or a harpy eagle, or something like that. One of those massive birds of prey. I think something like that.
We share that one. We share that one. I'm actually in the middle of planning my trip once everything opens up to go and see the Philippines eagle and talk to some.
Oh, lucky you!
Yeah, talk to some people who are involved in that project now. Wow. So we've got so we've got all the same plants and trees handbooks, and we're into the Philippines eagle. That's good.
Some similarities.
Yeah. Just it's a bit dangerous in some of the parts of Mindanao and some of those small islands where you can see the Philippines eagle. They're
you're brave actually.
Yeah.
Not sure I'm brave enough to head over there anytime soon.
They're pretty keen on kidnapping tourists, and I've already hidden from the NPA in the Philippines. It's not something I'm terribly eager to repeat. Now, Dan, I sometimes get a strange look and a strange response when I ask this question. But as a birder, and are you a twitcher? Are you a ticker and a flicker, or are you just immersive when you're out there? Are you just immersed in the experience?
I'd say probably the latter. Yeah, I'm not much for keeping lists or anything. I wouldn't.
So you can't tell me what your lifetime number is.
No, I don't have a number. Yeah, I don't have a list. And I don't particularly go chasing too often rare vagrants or anything.
Yeah, well.
But I just when I'm going out bush, I like to carry a pair of binoculars and see what I can find.
Yeah, and do you ever record the calls?
I've tried to on my phone before, but yeah, and usually it's not the same.
No, you need a pretty cool microphone for that to work well. Well, Dan, you mentioned, I think I've asked you pretty much all my getting to know Dan questions. I'm glad to know that you're immersive, and I'm rapt that you've got the plant field guides as well. So that's a true ecologist.
I'm on my way. Yeah, still learning, but yeah, appreciate everything within the system, I guess.
Now, if someone wanted to help out with the efforts with the Plains Wanderer, Dan, where should someone reach out? And are you always looking for volunteers to support your work?
Yeah, there's definitely lots of things still going on in terms of my fieldwork and side projects that I've got going on. So like I mentioned before, working a bit with the zoos on different things. So yeah, always looking for people who are willing to help, whether it's field-based or however you want to help. Yeah, certainly get in touch.
We want some business in the Northern Plains area, or the Central Victoria, Bendigo or northwards. We want some business to take hold of an association with the iconic Plains Wanderer and come up with a sizable donation, don't we, Dan?
That would be the best thing. We need to start securing a bit more habitat. I think if the plains runners have a viable population, like I mentioned before, we can't afford to lose any more. So whether it means acquiring more property or just supporting landholders to do the right thing, I think, the best way we're going to save the bird.
If somebody is sitting at home and going, what can I do? What can I do? Is there somewhere they should write to apply pressure for acquiring land or more stringent controls on land use? Or is it really a matter of supporting the projects that are underway, maybe through the various zoos?
Zoos and trusts for nature, probably the leaders in plains wanderer conservation at the moment. But like we spoke about before, the nature laws are really failing the plains wanderer. They're not protecting the habitat, and as a lot of people are probably aware, the nature laws are under a review at the moment, the federal environmental laws that protect species. So obviously writing to ministers and things like that, it won't hurt to know that people care and people want to see stronger nature laws for species.
Sadly, I think the government tipped its hand about this review by putting one of Australia's, most influential businessmen in charge of the review. I don't think
I'm not holding my breath for a good outcome.
Yeah, I don't think that was a real positive sign. Yeah, but
I
crossed.
think that's why. Some of the on ground stuff. Trust for Nature and Zoos Vic, they're doing really good things, and so there's a bunch of community groups in New South Wales that are also doing positive things. So definitely reach out to those people.
I'll put some links for Trust for Nature, Zoos Victoria, Taronga Zoo. You mentioned the other ones, and Friends of Terrick National Park. We'll give them a shout out as well.
Sure.
And
if people want to come up and see the grasslands, there's lots of different ways you can do that.
And if someone wants to follow you a bit more closely, Dan, I'm guessing that Twitter's the place to go for Dan.
Yeah, Twitter's the one. Yeah, don't have a webpage or anything, but Twitter, I'll regularly let people know what I'm up to.
And I'll link in the show notes, Dan, but it's at Dan Nug.
Yep. Yeah, at D Nug. Yep.
Oh, D Nug, not Dan Nug. D Nug.
Yeah, shortened it.
Oh. Very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks, Dan. I reckon people will want to look up the Plains Wanderer after our little chat. I'm not too sure anyone's going to be out spotlighting in the grasslands. We don't want to encourage that, not at all. But do exercise your curiosity and find out more about the Plains Wanderer, and especially if you want to follow up on the really good work that's being done before Dan publishes all of his results, which will be
hopefully something within the next year would be nice, but not everything, that's for sure.
Yeah, but Zoos Victoria and Taronga Zoo really active with the Plains Wanderer, and they're pretty easy to find. Dan, thanks for being a participant in the bird emergency. And
no, thanks for having me. This has been good to chat.
And best wishes with your academic endeavours and your practical endeavours to preserve maybe Australia's weirdest bird.
And it's probably up there. Very unique.
All right, Dan, thanks so much. Thebirdemergency.com is where you can find the links on the webpage. And look at that feedback stage where I'm looking for some feedback. So if you can check out Bird Emergency at Twitter and tell me if you like the show or if you don't like the show or if you want me to shut up, or perhaps head out to your podcaster and podcatcher and leave us a review. That would be great.
All right, cheers. Catch you later.
Hooroo.